evening, IBPC Chairman Mr. Suresh Kumar, conveners of all focus groups and forums of IBPC, fellow IBPC members, invitees, and a special welcome to our guest speakers, whom we thank for having agreed to come and speak to us to share their knowledge and insights on the topic. It's been a long wait. India's previous policy was laid out in 1986 in the pre-Google era. And for that matter, before any of us had internet or even mobile phones. In these intervening 34 years, the world has changed dramatically. The new education policy 2020 has not come a day too soon. However, it appears the wait has been worth it. The NEP is a seminal work aimed at transforming India's education system. It touches every aspect of the education sector and all the people who are involved in receiving and delivering education at all levels, right from pre-KG to PhD. Secondly, and significantly, more so to those of us looking to participate in the Indian education sector in any capacity, it throws up new opportunities. Opportunities that did not exist earlier. Now, to distill the salient aspects of this policy and to explore the opportunities it throws up for us, we have an expert panel this evening, comprising educationists and investors in education. Let's all extend a very warm welcome to our panelists. We shall introduce each of them in turn within the next few minutes, and the panel discussion will be followed by a Q&A session. Members, kindly ask your questions in the chat window from where I shall pick them up for the panel to respond. When typing out your questions, you may choose to name the panelist to whom your question is directed. We shall try and keep the session informal and conversational. And so, without further ado, let me, with privilege, introduce our panelists. They all have so many achievements to their credit that if I were to do full justice to their bios, it would keep us from hearing their insights on today's topic. Let me get started with introducing Mr. Anand Sudarshan. Joining us from Bangalore, he is the former Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Manipal Global Education, India's largest higher education services enterprise. He has also held several key positions in FICCI, which is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and continues to be active with them. He's an independent director on the board of the NSE-listed NIIT Limited, as also on the boards of several privately held corporations. He now runs Sylvant Advisors Private Limited, a strategic advisory entity in the education sector with a global focus. He's also a founding member of EDGE, EDGE, a think tank in the education sector. Importantly, he is one of the people who have reviewed the draft NEP document and given their comments. Anand holds an MBA from IIM Calcutta, and prior to that, he completed his bachelor's in engineering in electronics and communications from NIT Trichy, then known as REC. Next, we have Mr. Navin Valrani. Navin is the CEO of Arcadia Education, the school operator of the innovative Arcadia schools. Currently expanding its footprint in Dubai, that's Arcadia for you. He is also a member of the board of directors at the Al Sharawi Group and serves on the board of overseers at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Business. Navin's passion lies in teaching. He teaches the renowned Junior MBA program, a primary business curriculum, primary school business curriculum, I should say, that he founded at Arcadia School. His dedication to teaching and service led to him being awarded the William B. Castetter Alumni Award of Merit by the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education in 2019. Navin, together with his wife, set up and run the Monica and Navin Valrani Scholarship Fund for female students. Navin graduated with honors from the Wharton School of Business and then backed it up with an MBA with distinction at the London School of Business and an MS Ed at the University of Pennsylvania. He recently completed a career and college counseling certificate at UCLA and is currently undertaking his doctorate in education at the University of Pennsylvania. His wife, Monica, an early years educator herself, runs Ladybird Nurseries in Dubai. Finally, our third panelist today is Abhishek Sharma. Abhishek, formerly the head of education at Amanat Holdings, the region's largest integrated education and healthcare investment company, which he helped to establish, is a key player in the famed $1 billion IPO of Al Noor Hospital Group on the London Stock Exchange. Another landmark investment he pioneered was for a K-12 primary and secondary education provider, Madaris PJSC, also known as Taaleem more popularly. He has also held senior leadership roles at UAE's Itmar Capital and Sun Capital Partners, the latter being a $10 billion middle market private equity firm. Abhishek is a CEO of Foundation Holdings, which he established in November 2016. It was founded with the aim of investing in companies that offer affordable, accessible, and high quality education and healthcare solutions in the GCC and India. For his achievements, Abhishek has received numerous awards in the past 3 years in acknowledgement of his contributions to the education and healthcare sectors. Abhishek holds a bachelor's in science from the University of Pennsylvania, find a common chord there, and prior to that, he did his schooling in Dubai. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you put your hands together, even if you're not on screen, for all our panelists. I shall do so for my part. Let me start with Anand, on to the topic of this evening. In your estimation, Anand, what are some of the most significant policy items in the NEP 2020?
Ramesh, thank you. Thanks to you, the forum, and to you for inviting me here and to be amidst luminaries as fellow panelists. And I look forward to a learning evening. Learn a lot today, I hope. As you rightly pointed out, the National Education Policy 2020 has been long in the offing. 35 years is a long time, almost 35 years is a long time. And this document that we have in front of us today is after 5 years of intense effort, leading to the draft document, which was then submitted to the Cabinet in December 2018, then filtered, and a 400-page document was then brought down to 65 pages that we can see today. 65, extremely dense, and literally every word that can be interpreted and that needs to be interpreted as well. Some context before I just highlight a few points in the education policy. The first education policy in India was in 1968, and that's a point in time when our literacy rate at school level was extremely low, and our gross enrollment ratio, even at the higher education level, was extremely poor. We're really talking about single digits in most states. And therefore, the focus at that point in time was providing a basic structure and access as we moved decisively away from the colonial past into carving a new path for ourselves as a nation. And the policy, after quite a while, was revised or redone. Actually, a new policy was brought out in 1986. If you recall, and you rightly pointed out, that was the time of beginning of a lot of very interesting things that happened several years down the line, culminating in the 1991 reforms and all of that. So that was the time where technology was being visible, and the focus was on making sure that we were ready to have the talent pool that is required to take advantage of the opportunities. So that's the second, and this is the third. 1992, the 86 document was partially revised. It really isn't much of a revision. So really 1968, 1986, and 2020. Now 1968 and 1986 were inside-focused, policies that were focused because there was very great need of looking at specific aspects and immediate need that was there for the country. The 2020 document, on the other hand, is influenced greatly by what's happening outside, and a very clear message that while we need to take care of our people, we need to, for example, it refers to the developmental goals that have been signed. Development goal 4 is, to be very specific. It talks about equity. That talks about the place that we need to have in the world order of things, not in so many words, but in the effect of what it wants to, really talk about. It's a fundamental shift, and I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. And I will touch upon this later. And another very interesting observation, at least from my perspective. Now, what are the very key points? I will, detail out 4 or 5 points, and I will stop there. I think this, number one, this is the first time probably a policy literally addresses every aspect of education, starting from early years education, ECCE as it's called, early care and education, childhood care and education, set right through to adult education and professional education. It's a complete spectrum, which is very interesting. Probably the area in which the 2 areas in which the policy has delved the deepest, and rightly so. The first is the school side, the K through 12, and the second is the higher education. In K through 12, for example, we are all familiar with pre-K followed by or kindergarten followed by fifth up to 5th grade is a primary school, and then your secondary and higher secondary school kind of a setup. I think it really moves away from that decisively to create a 4-tiered system starting with 3 years of age, and it's called foundational, preparatory, middle, and secondary schools. So, and it's viewed in blocks, and the idea is to be able to look at developmental for aspects of children across these areas, and going from one to another as kind of moving from one phase to another. Interesting concept. It's got solid science behind it, and it's something that is very interesting, and it's going to require a lot of change that will come in. There is also a very strong focus on languages, multiple languages. Although politically that's a hot potato, the policy does tiptoe around that very carefully. It says that it'll all be, the choice will be with the states. The 3-language formula will have to be appropriate, but it does say out of the 3 languages, at least one language has to be a regional language, an Indian language. And it also says out of the 3 languages, at least in one language, by the time you complete your middle school, you should have some proficiency at a literature level. And I don't know what it really means in practical terms, but it's interesting that they have gone and described it to that, to that extent. The other very interesting part from the school's perspective is it's probably the one area where there has been a very strong accent on, actually naming for-profit schools. You don't find it anywhere else in the document. It's probably the one area where it is. And I think it is a lot to do with the communication that needs to go to the states. And states, as you know, in India, education is a concurrent subject, which means legislative ability is there both at the center and at the states. And I think I at least the way I looked at this is a message to the states that states, you have been handling, education, school education predominantly. We have not been interfering in it. It's important for you to look at it as a public good and a private good across board. When it comes to higher education, it's very interesting again. Probably even more interesting set of sweeping changes in higher education. I'll quickly reel off 3 or 4, and then I'll have one other point and I will stop there. What are the quick changes in higher education? The first one is, it says very clearly by the year 2040, affiliating systems will completely go. We will not have any affiliating institutions. This is very interesting. It also says that every district at least should have one multidisciplinary university. It's interesting because we have 739 states in India. There are about 1,000 universities already. So, and there are 43,000 colleges. I do not know the practical implications as yet in terms of how this is going to play out. But it's a very interesting, but a very strong statement. India is one of the very few countries in the world, our neighbors, Pakistan and Bangladesh being the other two, which have got the affiliating system, which has been given the go-by Britain many years ago, the originator of the affiliating system. So it was high time, and the policy makes a very decisive move towards it. The policy also moves away from insisting on a 3-year program to a 4-year program, undergraduate program, where the 4th year is done for those interested in moving towards a research path of life. Right? So you gain proficiency till the 3rd year, and with exits provided at every level. You can leave at the end of 1st year and get a certificate, leave at the end of the 2nd year, get a diploma, leave at the end of the 3rd year, get a full degree, and go and work somewhere, study further. Continue for the 4th year, get your credits for proceeding towards a research basis. So it's a very interesting mix that's been done, very fascinating and very liberating actually for universities. It also talks about bringing all the regulators under a single umbrella, and that's something we can talk about a little later. Yeah. And the last point that I will make here is its focus on vocational education. By 2030, it visualizes that at least 50% of vocational education actually gets integrated into schools and colleges. And that's a distinct step towards making sure that vocational education becomes mainstream. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anand, for that summary of the highlights. If I may ask, Navin, would you like to add any items from your side to the list that Anand has spoken about? Things that you found to stand out in the policy?
So firstly, I'd like to thank IBPC, Mr. Suresh Kumar, Mr. Ramesh. Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. It's always tough to go after Anand, never easy. So I wish you went the other way around. But I'll add just a few points from my perspective. As you said very aptly in my introduction, I have a teacher's heart. And I can honestly say that if I had to draft this policy, it would be very close to the 65 or 66 pages that have been issued. I think it's a phenomenal policy. It's very comprehensive, as Anand said. And it really addresses what education is all about. Very often we look at education as a means to an end, as a way of preparing students to go into the real world. But education is so much more than that. It's about preparing a selfless society that's based on values. And I believe that this policy does that. Firstly, as Anand said again, the focus on early years, I think that's fantastic. From the age of 3 through to 8, by the age of 8, 90% of brain development is done. So the focus on the early years is great. I truly appreciated that. I think the early years teachers would be extremely happy, because traditionally or historically, not only in India but globally, it's been a sector that has always received the stepchild treatment versus in the K-12 schools. The other is, of course, the idea on focusing on skills at the school level. I think that's great. At least somebody, for someone who teaches the junior MBA program at Arcadia, where we focus on life skills, I think that this is truly groundbreaking for a government to come out and place the emphasis on skills at the school level. It's something that I've been trumpeting for a long time. I think the idea of looking at education holistically, so this move towards a more liberal arts style education at the university level, I think will serve many, many students well. It will also make for more well-rounded citizens and a more holistic and happier society. So that's another big feature for me. And this again, features like experiential learning, discussion-based learning. These are all progressive thoughts that have all been built in one way or another at the school level. So I think, honestly, from a policy document, it's very close to perfect. I think it satisfies a lot of the different forces that are in India, a lot of the different, state versus central, a lot of different political forces, which gives it a real chance for a successful implementation. So personally, I'm very excited. I think, again, as Anand said, that the word for-profit is left out. I think from a policy perspective, that is extremely sensible. I look forward to seeing it being implemented now.
Excellent. Abhishek, would you want to add some from your perspective?
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I think the lens, as called the investment guy, I can add is maybe set some context of numbers, if I may, right? And before we jump to the NEP itself, a personal belief, at least I personally have, is along with healthcare and climate change and inequality, education truly is the single biggest powerful force to change the world and, of course, India. And so I'm glad we're having this session. Just from numbers and a context perspective, at least the education as a percentage of spend of GDP, regardless of which government has come and gone, has gone from 2010, where it was only 3% as a percentage of GDP, to today it's close to 7%. So there's a 50% increase already in the percentage of percentage spend. And within that, the K-12 spend now is close to $10 billion, which again was less than $5 billion even as late as 2012. So the arrow is in the right direction from a spend perspective and a share of mind. And at least from a schools perspective, today 1.5 million schools exist in India, which is a lot of schools. 250 million kids are studying in these schools. 400,000 are private schools, and 75% are what we would call affordable private schools, which is, call it 2,000 to 3,000 rupees a month. And so it's really 40% is a private market. And that's a key theme of a shift from a public to a private, which is what India has been consistently seeing. And that's a global theme of the thirst for private learning. So, again, that arrow is in the right direction. And the biggest drivers of at least curriculums in schools has been CBSE and ICSE, and not the state boards. So these curriculums see a double-digit growth. So from an investment perspective, of course, the arrow is in the right direction, and a policy like this should only cause the pace of change to accelerate. And it's really the right time for forward-looking investors to spot potential and act. So I'm glad the timing is now.
Great. No, thank you. All this is good news to investors. Now, something more on those lines. One of the outcomes desired by the NEP is 100% gross enrollment ratio. Anand, you touched upon the fact of the gross enrollment ratios being in the single digits in the past. Now, the target is 100% for the secondary and 50% for higher education. Now, the current levels, if you look at secondary, it's about 80%. And for the higher education, it's about 26%. Now, with these leaps or significant jumps in percentages, that would translate to a much larger secondary school student population, or for that matter, higher education population, as the case may be. In short, a much larger market to be served. How do you see this demand being met in terms of teachers and facilities? And what's the opportunity for the education sector entrepreneurs here?
A great question. You know, about 4 years back, I had an opportunity to work with a few people, and we had calculated what is the amount of money in higher ed that was required to move from the 22% GER, which was there at that point in time, to 70%. So you become close to what the Western world would have. And this is, remember, the pre-technology influence days. Technology wasn't viewed to be influencing even a fraction of the kind of influence that technology has today. And we evaluated, based on the work that we did, that we needed a total of 800,000 crores of capital investment just in higher education alone. Now, those numbers are very big numbers, but they are not really very big numbers. And we also calculated that at that point in time, close to 200,000 crores was being spent every year by people sending their kids to study overseas. If you had world-class institutions in India, a significant chunk of that wouldn't really be going outside, would stay back in India. And then we went on to really, get into an analysis. Won't bore the panel with the details, but it looked at 800,000 crores of capital was not very difficult to find. Now, this is pre-technology influence days. Now, we are at an era where technology is influencing greatly. The total amount of capital that would be required will significantly come down. Because remember, bulk of those capital would have gone on building buildings and so on and so forth, which lie quiet, unused, totally unutilized for probably 12 to 14 hours a day. Right now, when you talk technology, potentially it can be used 24 hours a day. So there is a very different way of looking at this whole thing. That's number one. Number two, you're absolutely right. Now, while I would have quibbled a bit and said that the policy should have said that student centricity is critical and everything should revolve around the student, and that's one axis, one focus. The second focus, there are two foci. The second focus is the teacher. At least the policy talks about how things have to be teacher-centric, right? It's forgotten the student-centric part. At least I haven't noticed it, but it certainly talks about teacher centricity. And there is extensive amount of discussions that are being held in the policy, and how faculty competences, capabilities, and capacity have to be transformed dramatically. Right from describing the creation of a 4-year integrated B.Ed to a whole bunch of other variations, plus even an accent in terms of teaching capabilities that will have to be brought into teachers who are in higher ed. I think there is a whole bunch of stuff that's out there. And I think that's the part that's very exciting. And each of these facets, I believe, represent opportunities for entrepreneurs. The policy itself does not talk about the extraordinary role that has been played by educational entrepreneurs in transforming India over the last 40 to 50 years. And that's politically possibly the right thing to do, given the fact that the Constitution of India visualizes education as a not-for-profit activity. It talks about the importance of charitable funds coming in, but it really doesn't talk about the energy that is required, the drive that's provided by entrepreneurs, and the role that they have played in transforming education. But it's interesting because in looking at these points that the policy does not talk about, I think we should draw a lot of succor from the policy. I think by not mentioning educational entrepreneurs anywhere at all, I think there is a tacit, at least that's the way I choose to look at it, there is a tacit invitation that's being extended to entrepreneurs. Seek opportunities within that. There is a lot that we want to do. It's a comprehensive document, as I mentioned again. There is a lot that India wants to do, and there is opportunity within that for entrepreneurs. And I think by not mentioning it and making that a lightning rod for controversy, I think this is a much more beautiful way, if the intention is what I think it was, to really leave it for entrepreneurs to look at.
While on that point, Anand, the setting up of a single regulator, is that a precursor to opening up education for a for-profits business? The moment you start
No, I don't
single
think so.
regulator,
I don't think they are connected at all. I don't think setting up of a single regulator goes far enough. They have kept law and medicine out of the ambit. And I think that's not, they should have put everything together in my personal view. But I don't think it's got anything to do with inviting for-profit education. I think for-profit education, regulated education, for-profit will still be frowned. But services, the amount of innovation that can be structured around the for-profit model that will be required to actually effect the transition, the execution part of it, which is the last section. And this is probably one of the very few policies I've even talk about the execution. That to me are it represents the areas where for-profit entrepreneurship can come in.
Very well, very well. Thank you. Abhishek, how are you positioning yourself for a spurt in demand, given that the GERs, the gross enrollment ratios, will bring in so many million students into the fold?
Well, Ramesh, I think at least as a firm, right, we have three key pillars we're normally looking to at least solve and invest on, right? The first one being access, second one being affordability, and the third one being quality, right? And accessibility, affordability, and quality. Historically, as we all know, actually globally, sometimes education is viewed as a social good, and it's almost the responsibility of philanthropies or government, right? And the size of the challenge is too big to leave it to someone else. Now, from an investment perspective, one of the key areas we're very bullish on is the K-12 segment, but specifically even within the K-12 segment, the education technology K-12 segment. And again, as a numbers guy, today that market is at $265 million, anticipated to jump to $1.7 billion literally in a 3-year time period. So that's 2022. So that's a segment expected to grow by 6 times. And, of course, if the whole tide rises by 6 times, there has to be a lot of opportunities for investors. So that's one from a numbers. And then similarly, the user growth, which is actual kids, again, 25 million kids today. That number is expected to jump to 110 million, which is the EdTech user growth. Again, I'm talking about K-12. So at least the policy will again accelerate this pace of change. Of course, what we've also seen is kids enrolled in offline coaching. That should slow down because the impact of EdTech will be that the traditional brick and mortar schools and with the advent of education technology, that journey should be more seamless and the usage of time is more standardized. So it's exciting today where the policy is leading to and the pace of change, but also the size of the opportunity. I think, it's probably one of the fastest growing markets in the world and for investors to participate in.
Yeah, great. Very promising, huge numbers afoot. Navin, this one is for you. In terms of structure, the K-12 completion age remains 18 under the NEP as it was before. But the number of curriculum years have gone from 12 to 15, the 12 being a 10 plus 2, and the 15 being a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, all of them school years. Now, the increase of 3 years is sought to be achieved by mandating the pre-K years. Now, this, you'd appreciate, has social as well as economic implications. Yeah. If you could please dwell on the social implications and Abhishek on the economic implications. That would complete.
So just not only in the early years, but in general, I think given the capacity increase that is required, I think the policy does an amazing job in addressing some of the key issues. So one is, obviously we will need a lot of teachers, and the respect to the teaching profession is addressed through the teacher training requirements that the policy addresses. The B.Ed, I think, is fantastic. I think to be able to go to university or college and graduate in 4 years with the ability to teach is phenomenal. I also believe that this capacity will be addressed in entrepreneurs, Indian industrialists, Indian NRIs will step forward through their philanthropic foundations and will give to society like they've never given before. Then there's also the government, right? We have clearly a very forward-thinking government and a government that will use some of its tax revenue to plow back into the education sector. So I think really in terms of addressing capacity, both in terms of the expansion of the early years, but in general, in terms of what India will need now, I believe the policy does a fantastic job. I'd like to just probably to spice things up a little bit for the audience, but also something that, at least that I believe in. I would like to differ from my distinguished panelists on the role of technology and the potential of EdTech. EdTech is clearly growing, so I don't deny that. I foresee the growth of EdTech, but for EdTech to be a replacement to bricks and mortar, I honestly don't see it happening during my lifetime. I'm only 49 years old, so hopefully I'll live a lot longer. And I think the biggest evidence for that is what's happened during COVID-19. I'm sure we have a lot of parents on the line, and by and large, students have suffered like never before. You know, this is a once in 100-year opportunity for the EdTech industry. And in my view, and in the view of many parents out there, they have failed miserably. Right? Students need to get back to school. And apart from the education aspect, which a lot of what EdTech is about, we have to understand that school is a lot more than just the delivery of a curriculum, right? There's nourishment provided at schools. Many Indian students all over the country go to school so that they can get a good meal. And the policy talks about an energizing breakfast and a lunch. So there's that side. There's also the social connectivity, the ability to play with friends, to make new relationships, to be in uncomfortable situations when you meet someone new. Only a physical school is able to provide this. And as great as Zoom and Microsoft Teams and everything else that's out there, the fact is, in my view, EdTech has been a miserable failure and will be a stepbrother, an enhancement to a teacher and a physical building during our lifetime. That's what I do.
Okay. In Abhishek's defense, do you think this is a case of too much technology too soon in response to a pandemic rather than a well thought through growth process, Abhishek?
Well, I think that's the true joy of India, right? Which is one size does not fit all. And the North is different from the East, is different from South and West, but also demographically, right? I think the entire, the entire spectrum, and I think BCG has done this very well, right? There's the deprived class, which they've defined, the aspirers, the mid-income, and then the rich, right? And then within cities, you have metro cities, tier 1 and tier 2. And this time I probably won't spit out statistics at you guys, but at least a key belief again, right? Why are we investing is what we've seen. The bigger cities, actually access is there, quality is there, and affordability sometimes becomes an issue. My personal belief here again, right? In this case is often the smaller cities. Now I'm talking about the tier 3 cities, tier 4 cities. The children, the learners are as talented as anyone globally. The teachers are as talented, but often the access, the training has not been able to reach some of them. And the infrastructure often sucks. So, this is where, while it's a good academic debate, right? How can one reach those cities in a lifetime? And how can one reach those learners in a lifetime? Sequentially is not possible, right? And I can give you an example of the chairman of the Ryan Group. right? And I'm inspired every day by him. He said, I want to reach every district in India. Now, each school costs hundreds of crores to build properly. It won't happen even in my lifetime or my kids' lifetime, right? So it's a bridge in this case. And again, the NEP, and coming back to investments and NEP, our job, of course, is the double good, right? We do good while investing. And, that's where for-profit, non-profit, I'm not sure of, which one is more important, less important, but there are hundreds of millions of children, as I said, and teachers who need access, affordability, quality, and technology is one of the ways which will help them get there. So it's a, call it a tangential point, but for us, that's become a must-have. And it's, maybe a learning from COVID that we have to participate as investors in what lies ahead. And that's where the approach was.
Yeah, great. Now, thank you. This one goes to Anand. The top 100 foreign colleges are going to be allowed into India. This brings two questions to my mind. First, how will our colleges cope with the increased competition, and that too the Farang competition? Second, does this represent a big opportunity for investors?
A quick comment on the earlier point before I get on to this. The only thing I would my experience has taught me about education is, as I guess it's most other businesses areas, is that never become a prisoner to the tyranny of the or. Always seek the benevolence of the and. And what I mean by that is, the moment you get into a conversation of a edtech or physical school, or any equivalent conversations of that kind across anything in education in India, you're really becoming a prisoner of the tyranny of the or. We have to move to the and more. And I think that the extent of and what role that technology is going to play, all of that will get clear over a period of time. So I think to say that EdTech has failed miserably is a factual statement, but not a fair statement. And I think that's I just leave it there, and it's interesting to talk about it as we go along. To answer your question, what will these top 100 universities coming to India, would it make a big difference? And what will happen to our university? I think they're going to welcome it, the good ones anyway. They will absolutely, if they have any sense at all, they will absolutely welcome it, because if you get the top 100 universities, even a small clutch of them, let's say 10 of them coming in, right? Now, what does a student require? And I think each university has to view itself as a student. In my view, a student requires to succeed in professional life, needs aspiration, perspiration, and inspiration, right? You need to aspire to become something, you work really hard, and then get inspired by certain standards. These universities are those standards. And I think they, being present here, competitively available for choice for the student that you are otherwise going and asking to join, I think will be a big difference. I think good institutions in India would absolutely love it. The not so good institutions in India will feel threatened, and that's fine, because that will act as an inspiration for them to change and transform and become better. So, I think there is absolutely no doubt it's a good thing for India, in my view. Does this represent an opportunity? I think yes, because these universities are not really known for taking millions of dollars outside their host countries and investing in another campus, except in rare examples. It really hasn't happened. Nottingham in China and Malaysia and a few others somewhere here and there. It's not a very large example set, and even some of these examples have been in collaboration with local entrepreneurs. So I think it represents an opportunity. But I don't think universities are going to stand in a queue tripping over each other to come to India. I think we should be very clear about it. Universities are being confronted with new realities. American, Western universities are being confronted with new realities. I've had a chance to attend a large number of webinars over the last 3 months. And I think one of the constant refrains that are coming is, our business model isn't going to work. and we need to really dramatically alter ourselves, starting with the amount of money that they charge per credit, right down to the way in which they deliver, right down to the significant source of revenue that they have, which is concessions in sports. So everything changes, and with that comes a very new model. And I think their focus is going to be on getting their model right. So the amount of attention that they will pay to come to India, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, isn't probably going to be very high. But eventually, I think India is too big a market. We have shining examples like Navin and Abhishek here, and there are many, many Navins and Abhisheks, who probably could not have had the opportunity and not having the opportunity today to go to the Whartons and Newpens of the world. And I think each of those, if they are given an opportunity to study in a top-notch institution, and an IIMC can aspire to become a Wharton and so on and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of very interesting, and I'm just spicing things up, but there's a whole bunch of very interesting things that can come out of it. I think it's a good thing. It's going to take a while.
Thank you. At this juncture, let me ask Navin. I assume both your alma maters would qualify in the top 100, yeah? Would you consider bringing UPenn and or LBS into India to set up a campus there?
I have to be careful what I say because I happen to find myself on the board of the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. So firstly, I fully agree with Anand that I do not see a rush of foreign universities lining up to set up campuses in India. Universities typically move very, very slowly, even during normal times. There is a huge cautiousness around their brand image. And there's also a huge hesitation amongst faculty to travel, right? So it's actually very challenging to set up a foreign campus of a university. So I think while the policy welcomes the top 100 universities, in reality, is it going to happen? You might see the odd one here or there. Do I see any of the top 10? I honestly don't. Now, having said that, does India need the foreign universities in order to get its university sector act together? I don't believe so. I think India today has some of the best universities in the world. I do believe that the policy by welcoming foreign universities, and even if we get the number 45th, for instance, or if we're fortunate enough to get an MIT, I think it will be a chance for our IIT to shine, right? Because I do believe IIT is a much more academically rigorous, stringent, and progressive institute than MIT. So I think, again, just totally in sync with Anand on this one, I think Indian universities, this is our chance to be on the global stage. I think we will shine. I believe even the, a university group that I'm familiar with, the Bombay University Group, I believe the colleges there are just phenomenal. Delhi University, phenomenal. Manipal University, which of course Anand is very familiar with, but Satya Nadella, our famous alum from Manipur, what is now Manipal University. But you just have to look around, right? I mean, Indians are leading by example in so many different arenas, and a big shout out to the vice presidential nominee of Biden, of Mr. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who was raised by an Indian mother, and today is one step away from becoming one of the most powerful people in the world. So, big shout out.
I'm getting towards the 56 inches there, but I must ask Abhishek, for somebody who has lived here all your life, I suppose, born here, schooled here, and went to UPenn. What do you think are the prospects of overseas universities coming to India?
So Ramesh, I was born in India, and I guess today in the global world, I have lived between India and Dubai, and I think the big thing, at least maybe I'll put my business lens back on, right? We have Navin, the educationalist, and of course Anand, right? A statistic which I've read is R&D spending in Washington is the same as Silicon Valley. Now, why am I suddenly talking about Silicon Valley and Washington? Everyone knows Silicon Valley. Where's R&D spending, and what the output is of both cities or both regions, right? The big difference is the level of commercialization which comes out of Silicon Valley and Washington, right? And just the companies which have gone. So for me, I think a key part of the international universities coming, right, is the essence of the big universities or universities today, which is a philosophical debate, is what is the essence of a good school, right? And maybe I'll even dial it back. I sit with Navin on some of the universities committees. A lot of parents genuinely believe the essence of a good pre-K or a kindergarten is to get into a good school. The essence of a good school is to get into a good college. The essence of a good college is to get a great job, right? So if there was a good pre-K which could get you a great job, maybe someone would just take that and buy that ticket all the way. That's the sad reality, and I'm generalizing the matter. Where does all this tie down to is the business communities need to help universities, and that's where while a university may be foreign and independent of the ranking, the local business communities need to step in. And that's about building partnerships and tech corridors and healthcare corridors and education corridors. And then the competitive hub often requires world-class research universities. So that's where rankings, right? We all love rankings, and often we love rankings is depends on where we get ranked, right? That's the human nature. But rankings are a direct function of research, and that's at least the US ranking system, which I do know well. So unless you have research, and that we are capable of as an Indian community, right? I feel like a copy-paste McDonald's approach probably will not work. But this is where the left hand needs to move and say, I can help you move up the rankings, which is back to research. And for that, you need to set up shop. COVID has shown it doesn't need to be a beautiful campus. We can work from home, and that's where blended learning and omni-channel learning comes in. So I think that's the thing which brings smile, at least to me, that I know the world in 2030 will be different and has to be different in 2020. What is it going to be like? I personally don't know, and I don't think any of us know. But that's where there are everyone, clever people need to sit around a table and say the foreign universities have to come to India. Why would they come? Research or technical partnerships, and it's the money is just the output. So it's a philosophical view which I have, but hopefully one day we will see these universities coming more.
I think that nicely rounds off that point on the foreign universities coming in. Now we have a question up on the chat box. Samir Inanda would like to know, is there any possibility of content being addressed? Seems to me that NEP is focused on the how of education. What about the what is to be taught? The curriculum. Does it need change? What kind of change? Will it happen, and when? There's quite a few questions tucked into this. Anand, would you like to have a go at this?
I just want to reserve a place for a new webinar just for this subject, because what Samir has asked is a massive, but let me try and take a quick shot at it. I think there are two or three things, nuances in the question that I just wanted to bring out, and he's right. The policy is quite a bit prescriptive. Normally policies tend to be so, governmental policies tend to be so. The draft policy was a lot more descriptive. This is a bulk of the prescriptive extracts. So the only problem with doing that is you miss the context. And I think, without the context, any prescription is not complete. And absolutely, content needs to be, that's the part, the what part of it, of what needs to be taught, right? When global context is changed, Indian context is changed, what needs to be taught? And I think that's a question that needs addressing. I think that's an opportunity here. There are two ways. One, there is an opportunity for intellectuals, people who are, steeped in education, people like Navin, others, teachers who are really steeped in education, to come together to actually review on what needs to be taught. Number one. But there is another interesting aspect to the whole thing, which is this what part of it doesn't have to be foisted from the top. Because the policy is silent about foisting from the top, you can let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I think that's important to understand in education. If you do not get multiple points of view and don't become excessively prescriptive and strident about one point of view, you will really miss the bus. We've generally had that problem ever since independence in India. It's been stridency, and I'm only talking about reflection in educational content and not in any other way. We've kind of swung from one to another, or at least wanted to swing from one to another, where the reality is context discovery. And I think that's the beautiful part of creating content that will mean something to the student. The kind of content that means a lot to a student going in one direction could be quite different from the same or a similar area content to a student going in a different direction. And the ability for the teacher, therefore, to become a part of the content creator rather than just a content deliverer. Today, the teacher is a content deliverer for the most part, particularly in school. And I think there is an opportunity for us to create a model where, at least in part, the teacher becomes a content deliverer as well. And that's the contextualization part of it. And I'm a big believer in the word context, because context keeps changing and context is different across different ethoses that you move in. And I think it gives the opportunity to provide for this change to happen. And that in itself has a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities as well. It's a big subject.
Yeah, thank you. Under the NEP,
can I add just quickly add to that? So,
sure, please.
Just to reinforce Anand's point, I think the policy is actually very, very clever. The policy documenters have been very clever in not addressing content, thereby giving tremendous flexibility to teachers.
Absolutely right.
So when you speak to a teacher, the worst thing you can tell them is go teach this. And this is how you're going to teach it. And here are the slides. No teacher likes that, right? Teachers enjoy being innovative in the classroom. I also, by not focusing on content, there's two real big messages that are important. Firstly, we have to remember that content is available on the internet, right? So when it comes to 21st century skills, it's not about content, right? It's more about, particularly as you get into the older years, it's about distinguishing, is this content from a genuine source? And do I have the critical thinking abilities to question this content, right? And the policy also focuses on critical thinking. Also in terms of context, we as Indians have been used to looking at every grade, every standard as you have to finish a certain number of things. This is the curriculum, then you have to sit for an exam, and then you have to pass, right? I want the audience to take this pass-fail mentality and throw it out the window. Learning is a continuum. So for instance, let's take something simple, cursive handwriting. Let's assume there is a curriculum in a particular state in India where cursive handwriting is there. Important skill for some. Now, they say, it's in the, let's say, the standard 4 curriculum. Now in standard 4, if I as a student am not able to do cursive handwriting, it doesn't mean I have failed. I may be able to do it in standard 8, right? So we have to look at learning as a continuum, and hence by not getting prescriptive on content, I think the government has been spot on.
Right. Now here's a question, Navin, from your dad. Schools prepare students for universities, and universities prepare them for the job market. So it is industry that decides what should be taught. It's kind of diametrically opposite your views. Any comments?
Okay, so yeah, always dangerous to disagree, not only with my dad, but with my boss.
I didn't know we'd be doing a Sorab Rastam out here.
So the challenge today is that industry doesn't know what they want, right? So if I, as a school leader, sit with industry, right? I sit with Abhishek, right? Abhishek is a smart, good, great CEO of a private equity firm. And I say, okay, Abhishek, I have students now entering secondary school, year 7 or standard 6, and tell me, what skills do you want? Right? I don't think Abhishek will be able to tell me that in 9 years he will need these skills.
Mm-hmm.
So really, where the policy is really important is focusing on critical thinking, focusing on discussion, focusing on experiential learning, planting those seeds of lifelong learning that no matter which direction the world takes, I will be marketable because of these skill sets that I have inherited or I've learned at school, right? And COVID-19 is a perfect example, right? Who expected a pandemic?
Teach them fishing rather than provide them the fish is what your answer is, I suppose. Great. No, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else would like to weigh in on that very important question from Mr. Mohan Valrani? Anand?
Can you repeat the question for me?
Schools prepare students for universities and universities prepare them for the job market. So it is industry that decides what should be taught. What are your comments?
So I just wanted that to be repeated for audience benefit. So it's important to, I'm just going to put a picture in front. There is one model of education that is quite common for people to think of. So it's really education is a fluid that's moving down a pipe. And then you think of a pump at the other end, which is sucking the fluid and directing it to different directions wherever the opportunities, job opportunities are. This is a very popular model of how education, I may have made it very graphic, but it's a very popular model of education that's often thought about. And it is not entirely wrong. It is one part of, because you learn to earn, right? And that's absolutely a part of your life, and a lot of people will have to do. You also learn to yearn, put a Y in front, because there are learning adds imagination, learning adds richness, learning adds many tapestries, many facets to one's personality and its thinking, which is going to make life rich and worth living. While learning goes on one side, that's the other part. So that's why I agree with that question. I think it cannot just be schools, prepare kids for universities and universities prepare kids for job market. Schools provide a pathway for students to universities. And when traversing the pathway, the 1,000 flowers are blooming. So you take in the fragrance of those 1,000 flowers. You move into a university and there is a whole new set of absorption that happens out there. So you're able to, make a new, and I think if with the new 1 year change and, accumulation of credits and moving here and there and all of that provided for, I think the rubric that's needed for something like this to actually happen is bigger. Because earlier it was not, remember, you joined electronics and communications engineering in the first year. That's all you can do till you graduate from undergrad. That's changing now. I think that felicity of designing as a student, for me to design my future, and that designing can be revisited regularly, taking inputs from wherever I am at any point in time. That's the beauty. And that's something that I think is going to make the entire process very enriching. But all of this is going to require enlightened people. So it's going to happen. And that's a bit of elitism that will creep in. It will happen in enlightened schools, enlightened universities, and may not trickle down. And I think the job of the government is to make sure that, this gets disseminated to a wide audience. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, multiple facets to the answer. There is one question that keeps coming up. By the way, we have a very active audience who are pumping away questions and comments onto the Q&A box. And so I'm going to seek the indulgence of all our audience and our panelists to grab a few minutes more out of this discussion. Yeah,
Sure.
I hope nobody has a problem with this. And I'm being a little presumptuous here too. Now, there's one topic that keeps veering around, and I think our chairman has articulated it best. So collectively, for all those who asked the question on this topic, here's the question. In India, there is a social bent that education is not a business. Nevertheless, there is a need to invest in infrastructure and equipment and pay the teaching and management faculty well. your thoughts. This is the same for-profits and not-for-profit situation. So eschew structures like trusts, only trusts, or structures that are not for profit. So piling onto this debate is whether for-profit institutions should be allowed or not. Abhishek, we know what your view is, but could you support it, please?
Yes, it's a difficult view because it's a question I do get asked frequently, right? And I'll start with, again, a philosophical view, which, I'll quote Bill Clinton: intelligence is evenly distributed. The hunger to learn is evenly distributed. Opportunity is not. Why am I saying this? As I said, I did grow up in India, and, we grew up with, in the 80s, there was a term roti, kapda, makan. And, I don't think my kids will associate with it because it's so simple. Roti is just bread, right? How can we aspire to bread? But that's where we are coming from. And that's the reality of the situation. So, where is this a moral debate is literally what is a public good? And again, right, luckily I studied economics, and it's a very narrow definition, right? To qualify as a public good, a good must be both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. A non-excludable good is like a pathway or a public sidewalk, right? Anyone can use it. You can't charge money for it. Non-rivalrous is if one more person uses that thing, the cost or the experience doesn't change, right? Think like music download, for example. So the classic example of a public good is national defense. The Indian military does not protect me any worse simply because it protects you at the same time. As long as I live in India, the military protects me whether I pay for it or not. So that's the starting point of, this discussion. And of course, from a technical perspective, if one is looking to start a school in India, the first and foremost thing is either you form a trust or a society or a Section 8. And of course, the important element is the formation has to be not for profit or a non-proprietary in nature. So, why do I give this big preamble is, that's often, like we said, universities take a long time to move. Education also, the roots we've come from, they're from different roots and also unifying different structures. The responsibility of the community is a level playing field, and that's standardization. Like the classic cases of SATs, right? What one has seen in America is SAT was supposed to be the leveler, right? Mm-hmm. That's how you did well in SATs, you got in, right? It was independent of race, color, religion. SAT did not know what you came from. Guess what happened? There are coaching classes. You pay good, you get better grades, right? So again, the uniform leveler SAT became a matter of who paid, and now it's become success-based SATs. So some people are so confident they've cracked it that I don't want any fixed. I'm confident you pay me a lot of money, so it's all success, but I will move up your SATs. So just dumbing down all these examples to my, simple example of where the structures are formed from. The structures are frameworks, right? And it's taken us a lot of time to get to this, revision of a framework. I'm confident at some point there will be structural changes, and we're hearing, for example, in Telangana and some of the other states that this may change. Now, whether it's in my lifetime or anyone else's lifetime, I'm not sure. But to me, it's a matter of time. But also as a country, we need to walk like a child and then run, and then, the pace of things happen. There are different structures to invest in India, as we've learned. And, these things are now adopted by some of the global firms like KKR, some of the young and aspiring firms from the Middle East like ourselves, from Singapore. So there is a way, but, it will take time. And, good things wait to those who wait. So I'm confident this will sort itself out.
Yeah, great. Navin, you want to pitch in, on this?
Yes, so three things here from my perspective. Firstly, I believe the private sector has a huge role to play. And connected to that, my second point is, as the questioner, Mr. Suresh Kumar, has said in the question, we need to have the right institutions as private investors in order to be comfortable to invest in the education sector. So I think the first thing the government needs to do is, I think the government of India has done a great job in attracting foreign capital. But when it comes to the education sector specifically, there's more institution building that needs to be done. When I was doing my MBA in 2013, the professor asked the class question and said, "Do you know which country in the world has had the highest GDP, has had the highest economic growth over the last 35 years?" It was Botswana. And it was because of the institutions that that country created 35 years ago. So similarly, I think India needs to create institutions that make private investors comfortable. But the third point also, and this is coming from a K through 12 sector, I do believe this.
Lost you, Navin?
I'm back. I do believe that the school sector needs to be regulated. And, Dubai is a perfect example. We have the most forensic accountability regime in the world. And they've done, the Dubai authorities have done a fantastic job. So I do believe that once the K through 12 sector is regulated, you take care of both sides. The investor side, but also the idea that greed should not overtake what's right for the student.
Indeed. Great, super.
Ramesh, may I add a couple
yes,
of...
please, Anand, please.
Yeah, quick. This whole the approach of building around a business model, a not-for-profit business model, is very antediluvian. It's got no place any longer, number one. What's really needed is transparency and accountability. Data, transparency, accountability, those are the things that are needed. It has actually been well established that a for-profit model provides for data accountability and transparency and accountability far better than most other models. There are enough examples that I can continuously keep talking about it. That's number one. Number two, at the end of the day, the difference is between, it's not a for-profit, it's people are against for distributable profit. And I think that's the issue. If money is extracted out of the system and distributed on a regular basis, beyond a certain level, that's a problem. These are all, things that can be discussed, and step-by-step measures can be arrived at. I personally do not believe this, this fascination for not-for-profit, should continue any longer. And finally, I would argue that education is, probably not as much for public good as it is for private good, as in an individual good. So it's not public versus private in the way you normally argue. I'm arguing that it's making a difference to a student. It is making her succeed. It's making her achieve her ambition and aspirations and move up life. So it's making a difference to an individual, and that's how we need to look at it. And if there is any model that can make a student successful and take that person to the next level, make him succeed, and that's a model that needs to be encouraged. And we shouldn't be getting into these, unfortunately, NEP does get into these kind of arguments in a couple of places. There is also this statement about pride in our past. And I think that's a wasted sentiment. I think we should draw confidence from our past rather than just being proud of our past. We should really build for today and for the future, and just not look behind, but look around as well. I think these are the things that I would have been very happy if the NEP had provided, if I were to make a couple of critical comments.
Okay, so that rounds off that point very well, Anand. Here is an egalitarian sounding question from our member NP Ramachandran. In India, as per the constitution, there is a right to education. Yes. What is the take in NEP 2020 to reach out to rural villages and avoid dropouts at early stages? Would you like to take it, Anand?
Sure. I think the interesting thing about the NEP is that it acknowledges not just 1968 policy and the 1986 policy and the 1992 revision, but it also very specifically mentions right to education, 2009, enacted in 2009. Now, my take, so therefore the NEP is very clearly aware of the importance of bringing in, equity. And I think that's something, and the NEP also speaks quite eloquently about the importance of attracting students. And you started off with that as a point of reaching 100% gross enrollment ratio at the secondary level, and using methods, including making sure, I think Navin spoke about it, the availability of good food, healthy food, nutritious food. I think there is a holistic approach towards this that NEP addresses. Now, to answer Mr. Ramchandran's question, the problem is not the intent. NEP describes, on all of these matters, the NEP describes the intent. The challenge in going to each and every corner of every village in those 739 districts is really going to be one of execution, right? And we know that, and execution is the key. The Ministry of Education, while it was called the Ministry of Human Resource Development, now it's Ministry of Education. Ministry of Education isn't really necessarily a favorite post, as I understand, for really exceptional bureaucrats. We need to attract them. We need to make them, give them the ability and power both at state and central level. So this part of it, which is the government's responsibility, is executed well. The private sector tends to be at certain areas. Now, having said that, I will also add an important role played by about 300,000 schools, which are affordable private schools. They are actually doing an awesome job. Small edupreneur with 1 or 2 schools, typically in a remote area, in a small town, doing astounding job. How much do they charge fees per annum? 8,000 rupees, 9,000 rupees. Honestly, it's exceptional, the job that they're doing. The actual spend that they have, is lower per student than what a government school goes through. And they actually get better results, far better results actually. Not every one of them, but many of them. So to me, there are many models, many interesting variations that exist. I think it's in the execution.
Thank you, Anand, for that very in-depth response. We're coming up to 7:18. We've run 18 minutes over time. So with your permission, let me take the last 2 questions. Hemant Mayankar writes, any thoughts on how the issue of teaching kids in their mother tongue till grade 5 will get implemented, especially in cosmopolitan cities like Mumbai? While the goal sounds good, implementation would be a huge challenge and might become a politically sensitive matter. Your comments, Navin?
Look, in any policy, in any procedure, efficacy is the key, and efficacy largely depends upon implementation. Now, I think the government is very astute, the central. I do believe they've already indicated that they are going to form committees. The committees will comprise of people from the center and from the state. And I think, our Prime Minister has got this uncanny ability to make things work. And no matter which side of the political spectrum you are, I don't think anyone can doubt the center government for its efficacy when it comes to implementation of policies. So I have great faith that Prime Minister Modi and his team will strategically maneuver the state governments to ensure that this becomes a reality.
So intent is well understood and respected, while the means is whether jugaad or otherwise, you reckon it'll get done. Does Anand have a comment on this?
I think it's going to be a lot tougher than that. I mean, I belong to the optimistic camp that Navin obviously belongs to, so I am a flag bearer of the optimistic camp. But in this particular one, it's going to be a lot tougher than it's. I'll tell you the reasons why, right? Now, mother tongue is a tough one to decipher, right? It's therefore the tongue that is spoken at home. The father and mother may have 2 different mother tongues. Now, what happens when you start a school in a tongue that's offered only in one state? I'm in Bangalore, so let's say you join a Kannada medium school where the primary language of medium is Kannada, and I get transferred. My father gets transferred, right? And I'm in a place where there are no Kannada medium. I mean, there are many operational questions that are out there. I mean, the intent and the political astuteness of the Prime Minister is undoubtable. There's no questions about that. But actually getting it done, it's going to be this is going to take many years. There is also the question of content, lively, and enriched content across subjects, not just liberal arts and history, but STEM subjects and so on and so forth across. The policy talks about 8 languages, Tamil, Telugu, and so on and so forth. You have to go way beyond that, you have to include Marathi, for example, or you include Ahomia, for example. See, this is something that has to be a lot broader than what currently it appears. So the implementation challenge is far bigger. The intent is good. I think let's see how it gets rolled out.
Very well. This one, let me map this on to Abhishek. This is from Srikant Ganesan. Could Google-like engine be a good surrogate teacher? And if yes, could tech help bring in calibrated teaching in India? Could this reduce the gap between private and government institutions?
Well, you've got me there, Ramesh, because I'm sure my mother is listening, and my mother was a teacher. So,
Okay.
I'll be in trouble if I said anything but the highest regard and respect. So this is, and I still live with my parents, and I'm proud of that. So for me, it's one of those discussions that, it's a quick answer, which is nobody can replace a teacher. And, the role of teachers, honestly, can only be respected and regarded. And, this is just how society is formed, right? Which is, for some reason, we have decided that private equity guys like me can get paid well, and we get paid more than a teacher. But the effort of a teacher is significantly more challenging, I promise. And I have 2 little kids than a teacher, right? So maybe in some other lifetime, maybe in some other country, someone with the wand would say the PE guy gets paid less and the teacher gets paid more and is respected more, right? So that's one piece of it. And then, of course, and I'm not answering the Google part, but I think, if one just looks at places like Singapore or Finland, why are those, places respected from an education perspective? From what I've understood, right, the teachers actually, the role of the teacher, the best get drafted into the teacher workforce. So right there, it's the best who get into the teaching profession. And, that should be the spirit and the role. Now, having said all of this, it doesn't mean that technology, again, I'm not talking about Google, cannot help, right? Because back to my example of in smaller cities, in places where it's not possible to spend the money easily on teacher training, that is a global need. There has to be a way to get technology to alleviate the affordability and the quality and the access. I was speaking this morning to someone from Calcutta or Kolkata in this case, and she spoke clearly of now how teachers and even the higher education learners, they have access to anyone in the world, right? With Coursera and some of the other platforms. So the competition is now not between South Bombay, North Bombay, or Karama and Bardubai. It's, between Seattle and Chennai, right? For a platform. And that's the great leveler which we're looking at. So for me, while it's an investment related question, and I'm sure there will be many, many good companies to invest in because of NEP and the teacher training and the center force in terms of bringing the teacher to the center of everything. That makes the entire industry exciting. But, we are already starting with the moral view that the teacher is at the epicenter of the whole thing. So, that's my personal view. I'm sure with Google and any other platform, that role becomes better. That's, as Anand said, it's and the teacher and Google is better, or, leads to better outcomes than Google alone, right? That's for sure my view.
The ancillary, but not a substitute. Supplement, but not supplant.
Yeah.
Great response there. The final question that we take this evening is from Ram Prasad.
Sorry, just so I can shout out to my panelists, right? In this case, so Navin is a teacher, and so he does prove that although PE might be mankind's greatest calling, after that you still become a teacher, right? So right there is the proof that actually it's whatever you do, you still always have to do lifelong learning and can become a teacher. So respect to him.
QED, Navin, QED. So Ram Prasad writes, how does the NEP balance job-oriented versus knowledge-oriented education? It's a question for Anand, he says.
I think it balances it out by providing a choice. just let's look at it this way. Two things happen. Number one, the NEP envisions weaving of vocational education. It doesn't use the word skills, it uses vocational, which is pretty good because the word vocational really has a secondary kind of a status. It seeks to change that, I think, and it's a very brave and a very honest and a move to be appreciated. So it seeks to have 50% of those vocational skills incorporated, including life skills incorporated right at the school stage. And then by providing this interesting and flexible model that you join undergrad, and then you can step out and move into a different mode after year 1, 2, 3. I think it creates an opportunity for individual students to discover their interests and really craft their way towards the career that they want to go towards. And I think well implemented, and of course, again, we're going back to the same thing that it has to be implemented well implemented. I think over a few years, this could start becoming something very interesting from a job orientation. Now, all of this has to be balanced with how the economy does. There have to be jobs for all these students coming out. So, going back to my earlier model of the pump stops working. The fluid is just going to push it. There's no way for it to go out. You're going to have a problem. So, the economy has to work. There are multiple things that have to come together, but I think NEP is envisioned this part of it reasonably well, and I hope it gets implemented well too.
Very well, very well. While I kick off the conclusion portion here, here's a closing comment from our chairman. If not a business, it is certainly industry, and an institution building mindset is needed. Avoid politicians masquerading as educationists. Yeah. So this is, I think, apt to include here as a normative statement. Hopefully will get institutionalized in due course. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish we could go on and on, but I'm sure our panelists need a break, as many of us in the audience do too. In conclusion, I wholeheartedly and sincerely thank our panelists for bringing all their experience, their insights, and their wealth of knowledge to bear on this panel, and for taking the time out of their busy schedules, what with the KHDA demands and the private equity world's demands, as well as the advisory world's demands on them. I only wish we could have another panel discussion with the self-same panel and address all your other questions and to dwell deeper into this very vast subject. I agree with Navin when he said this needs a workshop of multiple days, 5 days perhaps, not just an hour. But an hour has been stretched to an hour and a half. Once again, thank you very much. If any of you have any closing comments, be glad to hear them, panelists.
None except the exciting times ahead, the long-awaited NEPs here. So, entrepreneurs, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Navin, any closing comments?
Just expressing gratitude to the IBPC and to all the audience members to have the patience to listen to us. I hope the panel discussion was informative, and I look forward to a better and bigger and more educated India in the future.
Great. Thank you, everyone. On that very optimistic note, Jai Hind. Until the next seminar. Good night.